Hey guys, welcome back. Go ahead and get comfortable. Dim the lights, settle under the blanket, maybe put your phone face down so you're not tempted to scroll halfway through. Tonight's story isn't about kings or queens, or any royal scandal involving suspicious cousins. Though, don't worry, there will be a few of those later. Tonight, we're going way deeper. Literally. We're heading underwater to meet the empires that sank, the cities that glittered once under the sun, filled with temples, marble courtyards, and probably a decent amount of political nonsense. Until one day, they were gone, swallowed by the sea, and the ocean, as it turns out, has an impeccable memory. It forgets nothing. It just hides everything under a few centuries of sand and fish poop. So tonight, we're floating slowly through the drowned worlds of human history. The real-life cities that vanished beneath waves long before submarines or scuba tanks could find them again. And no, we're not talking about the fantasy version of Atlantis with glowing crystals and mermaid councils. We're talking about the real ones, where archaeologists still dive down with flashlights and find statues staring back through coral. So, take a breath. Let's drift back to when the sea wasn't quite where it is now. The sea was once further away. Let's start with a comforting reminder that the world has always been a bit unstable. For the last 20,000 years or so, Earth's coastlines have been playing musical chairs. At the height of the last ice age, the sea level was about 400 feet lower than it is today. London would have been basically landlocked, and Indonesia was one big connected landmass instead of thousands of holiday islands. Then the ice melted. Slowly, dramatically, and inconveniently for anyone who had built a temple near the beach. As the sea crept up, thousands of settlements just slipped away. Some disappeared completely, others lingered in shallow bays, becoming ghostly reefs, and a few, the lucky ones, got rediscovered centuries later when divers stumbled across columns or stone walls where there definitely shouldn't be any. But of course, humans being humans, we immediately romanticized it. We invented stories about cursed cities, angry gods, and moral lessons about pride before the tide. Because obviously, it's not that our ancestors built too close to the shoreline. It's that Poseidon was having a bad day. The original overachiever. Atlantis, sort of. We can't talk about underwater empires without mentioning that one. Atlantis, the myth that refuses to die. Plato came up with it sometime around 360 BCE. He claimed the story came from a distant Egyptian source, which, for philosophers, is the ancient equivalent of saying, "A friend of a friend told me." According to him, Atlantis was this massive, advanced island nation beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which basically means somewhere near modern Gibraltar. It was circular, ridiculously wealthy, filled with temples plated in gold and silver, and led by a royal family descended from Poseidon himself. And then, surprise, they got arrogant. Tried to invade Athens. The gods got annoyed, hit them with some earthquakes, and Atlantis sank beneath the waves in a single day and night of misfortune. Tragic, yes. Conveniently moral, also yes. Historians today mostly agree that Plato wasn't writing geography. He was making a point about political hubris, and possibly shading his own society while pretending it was about someone else. Still, the story stuck. It's hard not to be obsessed with the idea of a perfect city buried under the ocean. And so for the last 2,000 years, people have been looking for Atlantis everywhere, from the coast of Spain to Antarctica, because apparently beyond the pillars can mean literally anywhere if you squint hard enough. But while Atlantis itself may be fictional, the idea behind it isn't. Cities do sink, and some, like the ones we'll meet tonight, are every bit as haunting. Let's float over to ancient Egypt, the city of Heracleion. Imagine standing at the edge of the Nile Delta about 2,300 years ago. The air is heavy with humidity. You can hear gulls, boats creaking, merchants yelling at each other over taxes. All the usual background noise of a bustling port city. This is Heracleion, the gateway between Egypt and the Mediterranean. If you were a Greek trader, this was your check-in point before you were allowed up the Nile. Think of it as customs control for the ancient world, but with more gold jewelry and incense. Heracleion wasn't some small fishing village. It had temples, markets, docks, and statues so tall they made tourists feel appropriately small and reverent. And then, one day, it just vanished. For centuries, no one even remembered where it had been. Ancient texts mentioned it, sure, but so vaguely it might as well have been myth. People thought maybe it was a poetic name for Alexandria. Until, in the year 2000, a team of underwater archaeologists led by Frank Gaudio went diving off the coast of modern-day Abu Qir and found Heracleion, lying about 30 feet below the surface. There it was. Statues, columns, shipwrecks, coins, even temple foundations, perfectly aligned in the seabed silt. The city had literally slid beneath the sea around the 2nd century BCE, probably after an earthquake or a gradual collapse of the soft Nile delta soil. The ground liquefied, as it tends to do when you mix sand, water, and bad luck. Today, divers can swim past the giant statue of Hapi, the god of the Nile flood, who's still standing, serenely, like he planned the whole thing. Heracleon's story is a quiet reminder that even the most powerful civilizations were one tectonic twitch away from becoming fish habitat. The sister city that followed. Canopus, not far from Heracleion, there was another coastal city called Canopus, which already sounds like the name of a doomed ship, so maybe destiny was at work. Canopus was known for two things: luxury and temples. Basically, it was the Las Vegas of ancient Egypt. Wealthy Egyptians went there to drink, dance, and occasionally pray, not always in that order. The Greeks loved it too. They even dedicated a temple to Serapis, a mashup deity that combined Greek and Egyptian traits because compromise gods were trendy back then. Like Heracleion, Canopus also sank, probably the same way, through a mixture of subsidence, earthquakes, and a slow, soggy surrender to the sea. If you visit the area today, both cities lie side by side beneath the waves, like twin ruins dreaming of sunlight. It's oddly poetic. Two coastal cities, both vital to trade and religion, just exhaling one day and slipping under. And yet, their stories only re-emerged in our lifetime. So, for 2,000 years, Egypt's coastline kept a secret. And honestly, that's kind of impressive. The desert might preserve history, but the ocean buries it beautifully. Drifting east, the mystery of Dwarka. India, let's float east for a bit, across the Red Sea, over the Arabian waters, to the coast of India. Here, near modern-day Gujarat, lies Dwarka. It's one of the 7 most sacred cities in Hinduism, said to have been built by Lord Krishna himself, the divine hero who apparently didn't skip leg day, because his temples are legendary. The ancient texts describe Dwarka as a golden city with palaces, gardens, and harbors bustling with ships. But according to the Mahabharata, it didn't end well. After Krishna's death, the city supposedly sank beneath the sea. Poetic justice, or maybe just coastal erosion. For centuries, Dwarka was considered a myth. Then, in the 1980s and 1990s, marine archaeologists started finding something unusual. Submerged walls, stone anchors, and pottery, all dating back several thousand years. The evidence is still debated, of course. Some say it's proof of a lost urban settlement from around 1500 BCE. Others insist it's a natural formation that happened to look suspiciously organized, like the ocean's version of modern art. But here's the thing. Whether or not it was the Dwarka of legend, something real was down there. And for believers, that's enough. The waves might have taken the city, but the myth survived. And maybe that's the point. The sea may erase walls, but it never quite manages to drown stories. A short detour through time and salt water. By now, you've probably noticed a pattern. Humans love coastlines. We build right up to the edge, throw in some temples for good measure, and act surprised when nature decides to redecorate. We've been doing it for millennia. In the Bronze Age, along the Mediterranean, there were whole trading networks of tiny coastal cities, some of which we've never even found again. In the Black Sea, sonar has revealed entire Neolithic settlements now lying on the seabed. And let's not even start on the number of Roman villas currently sitting under Italian harbors. If you thought beachfront property was expensive today, imagine buying one that literally slid into the ocean in the 3rd century. There's even evidence that parts of Doggerland, the land bridge that once connected Britain to mainland Europe, were populated before the sea took them around 6000 BCE. It's now a vast, muddy underwater plain where fishermen still pull up ancient tools and mammoth bones. So yes, the sea is the oldest landlord on Earth, and it always collects the rent eventually. Let's glide to Greece. Pavlopetri next stop, the Aegean Sea. Just off the coast of Laconia, southern Greece, lies Pavlopetri. It's considered the oldest known underwater city in the world, dating back around 5,000 years. It belonged to the early Bronze Age, roughly the time when people were figuring out how to make fancy ceramics and tell long, confusing myths about their gods marrying each other. Pavlopetri was a small but well-planned town. Streets, courtyards, even drainage systems, because apparently they had better plumbing than some modern apartments. Then, sometime around 1000 BCE, the land subsided after an earthquake and the sea just moved in. It's still visible today, perfectly preserved under a few meters of clear blue water. When archaeologists mapped it with 3D sonar, they found houses with distinct rooms, workshops, and even large storage jars still in place. It's like the residents just stepped out for a swim and never came back. What's striking about Pavlopetri is how ordinary it is. It's not a grand city like Heracleion or mythic like Dwarka, just a peaceful little town that the sea decided to borrow permanently. There's something almost comforting about that. Civilization doesn't always vanish in fire and conquest. Sometimes it just quietly slips beneath the surface and keeps existing. Undisturbed for thousands of years, the ocean keeps the receipts. Every time we find another sunken ruin, it's like the ocean is handing us back a postcard from the past. A reminder that human ambition is temporary, but the tides are patient. From Egypt's golden temples to Greece's humble fishing towns, the stories are all the same. We built, we thrived, we ignored the occasional flood warning, and eventually, the sea took it all back, and maybe, in a strange way, that's why we're still fascinated by Atlantis. Because deep down, we know it's not really about a single lost city. It's about all of them. About the quiet understanding that no matter how permanent we think our world is, the planet has other plans. So, as the waves rise and fall outside our windows tonight, maybe just remember, the ocean has been doing this for a very, very long time. Hey again, if you're still awake, impressive. If not, that's fine too. You're basically drifting like the cities we're talking about. And honestly, that's kind of poetic. Tonight, we're floating back to the Bronze Age, that long, confusing era when everyone was inventing metal, forgetting how to use it, and occasionally setting entire coastlines on fire. The Bronze Age was dramatic, but in the slow-motion kind of way that looks peaceful when you're half asleep. Let's start somewhere warm, expensive, and doomed. The Eastern Mediterranean. The Minoans. Partying on a volcano, our first stop is the island of Thera, which you now know as Santorini, land of white houses, blue domes, and overpriced cocktails. But before the Instagram tourists and infinity pools, Thera was home to a powerful civilization, the Minoans. Now the Minoans were basically the Aegean world's overachievers. Around 1600 BCE, they were running trade routes from Crete to Egypt, building palaces full of art and plumbing, and somehow managing to exist without a single fortress wall, because apparently, they thought being charming was enough of a defense strategy. And then came the volcano. Thera erupted in one of the largest volcanic events in recorded history. We're talking mountains of ash, tidal waves, maybe even climate effects as far away as China. The island split apart, literally exploded, and the sea rushed in to fill the caldera. An entire coastal city, known today as Akrotiri, was buried in ash and pumice, sealed like a Bronze Age time capsule. When archaeologists uncovered it in the 20th century, they found streets, staircases, frescoes, even pots still sitting on stoves. Everything was so perfectly preserved it felt eerie. No human remains though, which suggests the people escaped in time. They saw the mountain rumbling, shrugged, and decided to take a little vacation elsewhere. Smart move. Unfortunately, their neighbors on Crete weren't so lucky. The eruption caused massive tsunamis that slammed into the Minoan ports, wiping out their ships and trade. Within a century, their empire collapsed. Archaeologists argue about whether the volcano was the main cause, or just the cherry on top of an already crumbling cake. But either way, the Aegean power that once ruled the sea literally got sunk by it. Atlantis? Anyone? Yeah, some historians think this might be the real event behind Plato's story. A civilization wiped out by the sea, swallowed overnight, leaving behind rumors of a golden island. It's poetic, and also incredibly plausible. Let's glide over to the city of Pavlopetri. Again, briefly. We met Pavlopetri earlier, that neat little Greek town lying under crystal clear water. But it's worth revisiting here, because Pavlopetri existed during the Minoan period. Imagine, while Crete was flourishing with fancy art and questionable bull worship rituals, little Pavlopetri was just minding its business, fishing, weaving, probably gossiping about Cretans being extra. Then, when the tsunamis rolled across the region after Thera erupted, the waves likely reached them too. Not enough to vaporize the town, but enough to destabilize the shoreline. Over the next few centuries, the earth shifted, the sea crept up, and Pavlopetri gradually became a Bronze Age Atlantis. It's strangely peaceful down there now. streets still visible through blue water, like ghost veins of a city that never stopped breathing. Ugarit. When the sea came for the letters, let's drift east, to the coast of what's now Syria. Here once stood the city of Ugarit, a powerful trade hub and cultural center around 1200 BCE. Ugarit was famous for two things: writing and being in the wrong place at the wrong time. They actually invented one of the first alphabets. Their scribes wrote on clay tablets that have survived to this day, which means we have receipts for nearly everything. Trade deals, letters, temple complaints, probably at least one argument about taxes. And then, one day, it all stopped. A letter found in the ruins captures the exact moment. The enemy ships are approaching. There is no help. That's it. That's the last line. No dramatic ending. No follow-up. Just silence. Sometime around 1190 BCE, Ugarit was destroyed. Likely by the mysterious Sea Peoples, a confederation of raiders who decided that if you can't beat a collapsing world, you might as well loot it. Earthquakes and rising sea levels didn't help either. Parts of the coastline subsided, and the once bustling port became a shallow lagoon. The sea, as usual, took what was left, so Ugarit gave us the alphabet. And in return, the sea gave Ugarit a permanent vacation. The Black Sea's drowned villages. Let's move north for a moment, to the Black Sea, which, fun fact, used to be a freshwater lake. About 7,500 years ago, as global ice melted, the Mediterranean overflowed through the Bosporus Strait and flooded it catastrophically. The event might have raised the water level by hundreds of feet in a matter of months, a geological blink. If you've ever wondered why so many cultures have flood myths, well, this one would have made an impression. Under that black water now lie traces of Neolithic villages, stone tools, hearths, even possible wooden structures preserved in the oxygen-poor depths. The theory goes that entire farming communities were drowned, forced to flee uphill, carrying stories of the flood that later became the legends of Noah, Deucalion, and Gilgamesh. It's haunting to think that the world's most famous flood might just be humans remembering when their literal backyard turned into a sea. The forgotten kingdom of Baiae. Rome's sunken playground. We can't talk about underwater ruins without visiting Italy, because even the Romans couldn't resist building too close to the beach. Just west of Naples lies Baiae, the ancient world's luxury resort. Think hot springs, villas, and scandal. If you were a Roman aristocrat, Baiae was where you went to party, cheat, or casually plot political schemes in a marble bath. Seneca once called it a place of vice and luxury, which, coming from a man who worked for Nero, is saying something. Baiae thrived for centuries, until the ground started sinking, literally. The region sits on a volcanic field called the Phlegraean Fields, which has a habit of collapsing without much warning. Over time, parts of Baiae slid under the Bay of Naples. The marble floors, courtyards, and mosaics are still down there, eerily intact. Divers swim through submerged rooms where emperors once lounged. Even statues of gods still stand in place, their faces blurred by coral. It's oddly fitting, isn't it? Rome's most decadent city, now resting quietly beneath the waves. The ultimate metaphor for luxury's expiration date. A quick Roman interlude, Caligula's floating palace. While we're in Roman waters, let's take a quick detour to Lake Nemi, where Emperor Caligula decided that normal villas were boring. So, he built floating palaces, giant ships covered in marble, plumbing, and, allegedly, an excessive number of statues dedicated to himself. They weren't exactly lost underwater by accident. They were ships. But after his assassination, the Romans, in their usual tidy fashion, sank them on purpose. For centuries, locals could see the outlines under the surface, like ghostly shadows. Mussolini actually drained part of the lake in the 1930s to raise the ships, which he did, successfully. Then World War II happened, and the ships were destroyed by fire. Because history apparently just can't resist irony. So technically, Caligula's underwater palaces went up in smoke, which is a sentence I never thought I'd say. The sea is a historian. It's funny in a way. When we think of destruction, we imagine fire and chaos. But the sea erases differently. It doesn't burn or break. It just waits. A few inches a year. A few storms. A few centuries. Then one day, an entire harbor town has vanished. Replaced by fish, coral, and silence. And yet somehow, the sea also preserves. The ash of Akrotiri sealed its frescoes so perfectly that you can still see the reds and blues. The mud of the Nile Delta protected statues of pharaohs as if wrapped in velvet. Even Roman mosaics at Baiae look like they were cleaned last week. just gently waved over by time. So maybe the sea isn't cruel. Maybe it's the planet's version of an archive, a deep, salty library that files away civilizations for safekeeping. Let's drift south. The African coastlines that vanished now. The Mediterranean gets most of the attention because we've dug up so much of it. But Africa has its own list of drowned stories. Off the coast of Tunisia, for example, lie the ruins of Neapolis, an ancient Roman city buried by a tsunami in the 4th century CE. Divers discovered streets, mosaics, and vats once used to make garum, that famously disgusting fish sauce the Romans adored. Half the city's shoreline simply disappeared one night, and the rest followed slowly over centuries as the land subsided. And if you travel further west, toward Mauritania, there are legends of lost cities swallowed by the Sahara's shifting sands and by ancient lakes that once stretched across the desert. Reminders that not all drownings involve water. Sometimes it's just time doing what it does best. Why we keep looking, every few years, someone claims to have found the real Atlantis. Usually it's a blurry sonar image or a suspiciously rectangular rock formation. Sometimes it's in the Caribbean, sometimes Antarctica, sometimes just off the coast of Spain. Because apparently, Plato's sense of geography was a little vague. But really, we're not looking for Atlantis. We're looking for proof that human greatness endures, that something of us remains after the tide rolls in. It's comforting to think that even if everything we build eventually falls apart, the ocean might keep a copy, a sunken library of our arrogance, beauty, and bad architectural decisions. The calm before the next tide. So, let's drift here for a while, somewhere between Heracleion and Baiae, where the marble halls hum quietly beneath the waves. The sea doesn't care about empires, but it remembers them perfectly. Each tide rolling over the ruins is a gentle whisper. You were here once, and who knows, maybe thousands of years from now, divers will swim through the submerged shells of our own cities. They'll find traffic lights and plastic bottles, maybe an iPhone or two, and wonder what strange people once lived here. So confident that their world was permanent. It's humbling. But also kind of peaceful, because the sea isn't cruel. It's patient, it waits, and it remembers everything. Hey again, welcome back to the deep end. If you're still awake, congratulations. If you've already drifted off, that's okay too. You're basically doing what all these cities did. Slowly sinking into history. Tonight, we're surfacing just a little, not to breathe, but to talk about why we turned all those floods and drownings into stories of divine punishment, glowing kingdoms, and lost perfection. Because humans can't just let a natural disaster be a natural disaster. We have to make it about morality or gods or some poor fisherman who didn't pray enough. So, let's float through the myths that came after the floods, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, and see how, over and over, we kept trying to explain why the sea keeps taking our toys away. The world was drowning, so we built a boat, Mesopotamia. Our first myth isn't really a myth anymore. It's a cultural echo that just won't die. You know the story. A flood, a man, a boat, some animals, a god with questionable anger management skills. The earliest version we have comes from Mesopotamia, around 4,000 years ago. The Epic of Gilgamesh. In it, a man named Utnapishtim is warned by the gods that a great flood is coming. So he builds a huge boat, loads it with every living creature he can find, and survives, floating over what used to be civilization. Sound familiar? Yeah. The story later evolves into the biblical Noah's Ark, then into countless retellings across the ancient world. Every culture seems to have its own "we messed up, so the sky got mad, and the sea ate everything" narrative. But here's the interesting part. Archaeologists think these stories might not be pure invention. Ancient Mesopotamia sat between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which have a habit of flooding catastrophically. Imagine your whole village underwater, your animals gone, your temple buried in mud. It would feel like the end of the world. And over centuries, those memories turned into myths. So, maybe Noah wasn't a symbol of divine obedience. Maybe he was just the first guy smart enough to own a canoe. The Greeks and their eternal flood drama now. The Greeks. Oh, they loved a good flood story. According to them, the first great deluge came when Zeus decided humanity had become too annoying. A relatable sentiment. The survivor duo this time were Deucalion and Pyrrha, husband and wife, who built a chest, basically a boxy little boat, and floated for 9 days before landing on Mount Parnassus. After the flood, they repopulated the earth by throwing stones over their shoulders, which magically turned into people. Because of course they did. It's a strange origin story, but it does one thing really well. It ties natural disaster to moral reset. The flood becomes not just an accident of weather, but a way for the gods to hit restart on humanity. You can feel the collective guilt baked into it. Like an ancient group therapy session for coastal trauma. We got flooded again? Okay. We'll be good this time. Promise. Egypt, where the flood was a blessing. Meanwhile, over in Egypt, the attitude toward flooding was completely different. The Nile flooded every year, predictably, gently, life-givingly. So instead of fearing the water, Egyptians worshipped it. They even personified the Nile as the god Hapi, the big, cheerful deity you sometimes see carved with water lilies and an eternal dad bod. When the river rose, it wasn't a punishment. It was a celebration. The flood brought fertility, crops, and a reminder that the gods were still on payroll. Maybe that's why, when Egyptian cities like Heracleion sank later on, their myths didn't really focus on divine wrath. It was more like, yes, the river returned to claim what it loaned us, peaceful, almost poetic. Egyptians seemed to understand what the rest of the world didn't. That water never really destroys, it just reclaims. India's flood of Dharma. Let's float over to India again, this time for a mythic flood that might sound oddly familiar. In ancient Hindu scripture, there's the story of Manu, the first man. One day he rescues a tiny fish from a drying river. The fish, grateful, asks to be protected. Manu raises it, and the fish grows larger, so large, in fact, that it reveals itself as the god Vishnu. Vishnu warns Manu of a great flood coming to cleanse the world, tells him to build a boat, and then, very helpfully, tows it himself through the waters when the flood arrives. Afterward, Manu repopulates the earth and establishes moral order, Dharma. It's the same story again. A flood, a savior, a moral reset. But here it's less about punishment, more about renewal. The flood washes the world clean, just not as wrath, but as maintenance. Think of it like the universe doing its annual spring cleaning, aggressively. China's endless flood, and the man who fixed it over in ancient China. The Great Flood wasn't a one-time apocalypse. It was more of a long-term annoyance. The myth goes that the Yellow River overflowed for generations, submerging entire regions. The gods tried to fix it by appointing a man named Gun, who failed miserably. Then his son, Yu the Great, took over, and through sheer perseverance, engineering skill, and apparently divine turtle assistance, yes really, he managed to channel the waters into proper rivers. Yu's efforts founded the legendary Jia dynasty, the supposed first dynasty of China. Here, the moral shifts again. Water isn't punishment or renewal, it's chaos. Something humans must learn to control, with patience and wisdom. It's the same sea, but a different lesson. And maybe that's the most human thing of all. Every culture staring at the same waves, and each one seeing something different. The Atlantean hangover. Let's talk about Atlantis again, because it's kind of the ghost that haunts all these flood myths. Plato never meant it to be taken literally, but people can't resist. After all, Atlantis isn't just about a city sinking. It's about a perfect world ending. Over centuries, the story spread, twisted, and grew legs, or fins. Medieval scholars tried to connect it to the Bible. Renaissance explorers claimed to find its remains off the coasts of Spain or the Americas. And by the 19th century, Atlantis had turned into a global scavenger hunt, complete with maps, pseudoscience, and suspiciously convenient discoveries. But beneath all that, there's something genuine, a deep human longing to believe that somewhere, under the ocean, there's proof that we were once better, smarter, purer. That's the quiet heartbreak of Atlantis. It's less about geography and more about nostalgia, a civilization we never knew, but somehow miss anyway. Mesoamerica and the floods of the fifth sun across the ocean. In Central America, the Maya and Aztecs also told flood stories, because apparently, no continent is safe from symbolic drowning. According to Aztec legend, the world has been created and destroyed 5 times. Each version ends differently: jaguars, wind, fire, and of course, water. In the 4th age, the gods grew tired of humanity, sent torrential rain, and turned the survivors into fish. When the flood ended, the gods started again, creating the 5th sun, the world we currently live in, which is honestly a bit of a flex. Imagine being so casual about extinction that you just reboot the universe every few thousand years. The Maya had similar stories: great deluges, drowned worlds, rebirths. For them, water wasn't just destruction. It was a portal between worlds. The cenotes, those deep limestone sinkholes in the Yucatan, were considered sacred entrances to the underworld. To fall into one wasn't necessarily a tragedy. It was transit, a planet that keeps repeating itself. When you line up all these myths, Mesopotamian, Greek, Indian, Chinese, Mesoamerican, you start to notice something unsettling. They're all telling the same story. Different names, different gods, same plot. Humanity gets too loud. The world floods. The survivors rebuild wiser, or at least slightly less annoying, until it happens again. It's like the Earth's favorite bedtime story, one it keeps retelling through us. Maybe that's because deep down, we know the sea always wins. You can dam it, drain it, curse it, or worship it, but eventually it comes back to collect. The science under the myth. And here's where myth quietly meets geology, because as it turns out, many of those legendary floods line up eerily well with real events. Around 10,000 years ago, melting glaciers caused massive sea level rise. Entire coastal plains disappeared. The Persian Gulf, once dry land, the North Sea, a vast meadow called Doggerland. People didn't need to imagine the world drowning. They watched it happen. The memories stuck, passed down in fireside stories until they hardened into myth. And those myths, centuries later, shaped religion, morality, and even architecture, all because our ancestors once lived too close to the tide. Why we need the sea to be a character. Have you noticed how we talk about the sea? Never as water, always as something alive. She rises, she hungers, she takes. Maybe that's not superstition, maybe it's honesty. The sea moves with the patience of a living thing. It waits, it claims, it hums lullabies over the ruins it's taken, and we, the land creatures, can't help but give it a personality. Because it's easier to forgive a person than physics, so we call it Poseidon. We call it Hapi, we call it Tlaloc, Varuna, or the Dragon King. But really, we're all talking about the same ancient neighbor who's been moving the fence line for millennia. The myths never died. What's strange is that even today, in our satellite-mapped, data-driven world, we still tell new versions of these old flood stories. Movies, books, documentaries, all obsessed with the idea of lost civilizations. Atlantis becomes alien. Lemuria becomes spiritual. Even climate change gets dressed up in mythic language. Rising seas, angry planet, the Great Reset. Maybe myth isn't something we grew out of. Maybe it's how we cope. Every time the ocean erases a coastline, we tell a new story. Not because we need to explain the science. We already know that part. But because we need to find meaning in the loss. It's human nature. If the tide takes your home, you don't just move inland. You name the wave. The whisper. Under the waves, so the next time you hear a story about a lost city, maybe Atlantis, maybe something unnamed, imagine it like this. Not a fairy tale. Not a warning. Just a whisper from the ocean's memory. Because the sea does remember. Every marble pillar, every fresco, every step where someone once prayed or loved or dropped a clay cup. All still there, quiet. And maybe when you fall asleep tonight, you'll hear it. The soft hum of waves carrying the laughter of people who thought the tide would never rise that high. They were wrong, of course, but beautifully so. Hey, welcome back. If you're still awake, impressive. Most people would have drifted off around the third mention of tectonic activity. But not you. You're still here, floating somewhere between ancient ruins and REM sleep. So tonight, we're diving into the modern era. The age of scuba tanks, submersibles, and scientists who decided the best way to study history was to drown for it. This is the story of the underwater archaeologists, the quiet explorers who go looking for the cities the sea forgot, armed with little more than patience, oxygen, and an absolutely unreasonable belief that silt-covered rocks are exciting. The first time we realized there was a whole world down there. For most of history, we didn't really know what was under the sea. We just assumed it was more sea. Occasionally, a fisherman would pull up a chunk of carved stone, or a diver would find a statue head wedged in coral, and everyone would shrug, call it a gift from Poseidon, and move on. That changed in the early 1900s with a man named Valerio Stais, a Greek archaeologist who examined a corroded lump of bronze recovered from a shipwreck near the island of Antikythera. Inside that lump, gears. Tiny, precise, impossible gears. It turned out to be the Antikythera mechanism, the world's first known analog computer built around 100 BCE. The find stunned everyone, not only because it was unbelievably advanced, but because it meant something huge. History wasn't just buried in the sand. It was sitting quietly on the seafloor, waiting to be rediscovered, and so, a new kind of archaeology was born. One that traded trowels for flippers. Scuba. History's most convenient accident. The golden age of underwater archaeology began in the mid-20th century, thanks to a French naval officer with a flair for adventure, Jacques Cousteau. You've probably heard the name. He's the reason every diver still sounds like they're narrating a nature documentary. Cousteau co-invented the aqualung in 1943, the first modern scuba system, which turned the ocean into something you could actually explore without dying immediately. Suddenly, archaeologists could reach shipwrecks, harbors, and even whole cities lost to the tides. They weren't just guessing at maps anymore. They were seeing history, perfectly preserved in salt and silence. Cousteau himself found several important sites, including parts of ancient Alexandria. He wasn't exactly subtle about it. His team used cameras, lights, even explosives sometimes. But he opened the floodgates, literally and figuratively. And once humans can go somewhere, well, they never stop going. Heracleion. The Egyptian Atlantis, one of the greatest underwater discoveries, came in 2000, off Egypt's northern coast. Marine archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team were surveying the Bay of Abukir, near Alexandria, when their sonar scans showed strange shapes. Straight lines, circles, columns. At first, they thought it was a geological oddity. Then they started finding statues, massive ones. What they'd found was Heracleion, a real city that ancient writers had mentioned, but which everyone assumed was myth. It had vanished over 1,000 years ago, swallowed by the Mediterranean. Divers uncovered temples, sphinxes, coins, and even ceremonial boats still resting in the mud. Everything had sunk slowly, preserved almost like Pompeii, only wetter. Heracleion was once Egypt's main port before Alexandria stole the spotlight. But the city sat on soft, silty ground, a recipe for disaster when combined with earthquakes and gradual sea level rise. By around the 8th century CE, it simply gave way. The ground liquefied, and the city gently folded into the sea, taking its marble gods with it. Today, it's one of the most stunning underwater sites ever mapped. Proof that mythical cities have a habit of just being slightly deeper than we thought. Pavlopetri, the oldest known underwater town. Let's float over to Greece again, because of course the Greeks had to have their own submerged neighborhood. It's called Pavlopetri, off the coast of Laconia. It's not famous for grandeur. There are no giant statues or treasure. But for something better. Age. It's the oldest known underwater city in the world, dating back around 5,000 years. Discovered in 1967, Pavlopetri has streets, buildings, courtyards, even drainage systems. Basically, it looked like a perfectly ordinary Bronze Age town, except for the minor detail that it's under 3 meters of seawater. What's haunting is how normal it feels. This wasn't a place of kings or heroes. It was a working community. Families, potters, traders. And that's what makes it quietly tragic. It wasn't punished by gods or swallowed by pride. Just swallowed by time. When archaeologists mapped it with laser scanners, the city appeared almost intact, like a ghost grid beneath the waves. Each doorway still faced the sea. Maybe they always had. Port Royal, the city that sank in sin now. If Pavlopetri was ordinary, Port Royal in Jamaica was anything but. By the 17th century, it was known as the wickedest city on earth, a pirate hub full of taverns, smugglers, and the kind of diseases you only get from excessive enthusiasm. In 1692, a massive earthquake hit, and within minutes, 2/3 of the city slid into the harbor. Witnesses described the ground liquefying, buildings and people swallowed whole. And here's the eerie part. The sea preserved it. When divers explored the ruins centuries later, they found streets, bottles, even perfectly intact pewter plates lying exactly where they'd been set down. It's like time paused mid-sin. The ocean just closed the door and said, "That's enough for today." Port Royal became a natural time capsule, a warning, and a museum in one. You can still dive there, though it's considered a national heritage site now. Some say it's haunted. But honestly, what part of Jamaica isn't at this point? Yonaguni. The case of the accidental pyramid. Let's head to Japan, where things get a little weird, as they often do, off the coast of Yonaguni Island. Divers in the 1980s discovered what looked suspiciously like a massive stone pyramid under the sea. The structure had terraces, steps, and right-angled edges so sharp that everyone immediately started arguing. Some said it was proof of an ancient, lost civilization, maybe 10,000 years old, predating even the pyramids of Giza. Others said, nah, it's just a bunch of naturally eroded sandstone. To this day, no one's entirely sure. If you squint, it looks man-made. If you relax, it looks like geology doing cosplay. But that's kind of the magic of underwater archaeology. Half science, half imagination. Every discovery lives in that blurry space between proof and poetry. And Yonaguni sits right at the edge of that line. Mysterious, silent, and occasionally photobombed by sea turtles. Dwarka, where myth and science shake hands. India gives us another contender. Dwarka, off the coast of Gujarat. According to Hindu legend, it was the city of Lord Krishna, built from gold and jewels, later swallowed by the sea after his death. For centuries, it was purely myth. Then in 1988, marine archaeologists actually found ruins beneath the waves near modern Dwarka. Walls, pillars, and pottery dating back several thousand years. It wasn't golden, but it was real. The ocean had been hiding something that fit the myth almost perfectly. It's one of those rare moments where folklore and archaeology share a polite nod. Science can't prove Krishna lived there, but it can prove that something remarkable once did. And that's usually enough. The tools of the trade now. Underwater archaeology isn't as glamorous as it sounds. For every dramatic discovery, there are months of tedious mapping, data logging, and trying not to drop your expensive camera into the abyss. Modern archaeologists use sonar, ROVs, remotely operated vehicles, and even laser scanners mounted on submersibles. They map the seabed in exquisite detail, creating 3D models of ruins without disturbing a single coral. It's delicate work. One misplaced fin kick, and you can erase 2,000 years of sediment layering. So, most of the time, underwater archaeologists move slowly, really slowly. It's part science, part meditation, part underwater yoga session. Some of them say they do it because it feels like touching eternity. Others admit they just really like fish. Both are valid. The quiet museum beneath the waves. Here's the part most people don't realize. The ocean is the world's largest museum, and it's still open for deposits. There are over 3 million shipwrecks estimated worldwide, and countless submerged settlements. Some are being carefully preserved, while others are slowly dissolving. You can visit a few. There's the underwater archaeological park of Baiae in Italy, a literal sunken Roman resort town where you can snorkel past mosaics and bathhouses. It's like swimming through a postcard from the 1st century. In Egypt, they're planning underwater museums for Heracleion and Canopus. Because, really, where else would you put them? When the future becomes the past. Here's the sobering twist. While we're busy exploring ancient cities swallowed by the sea, modern ones are quietly lining up for the same fate. Venice, Jakarta, New Orleans, parts of Miami, all sinking or flooding faster than they can adapt. The ocean, it seems, hasn't lost its appetite for architecture. Maybe, thousands of years from now, some future archaeologist, half human, half whatever we've evolved into, will swim through the ruins of our skyscrapers, gently brushing silt off a Starbucks logo and muttering, "Ah, early 21st century, the caffeine cult." We like to think we're different from the ancients, but the tide doesn't care what century it is. The ocean remembers, even if we don't. There's something almost comforting about it, though. Every time a city goes under, the sea doesn't destroy it completely. It preserves the outline, a faint echo of how we lived. Maybe that's the real afterlife of civilization. Not in heaven, not in legend, but quietly suspended in salt water. When archaeologists uncover a marble column or a broken pot underwater, they're not just finding objects, they're finding moments. The way light once fell through a window, the sound of a market that ended mid-sentence. The ocean remembers in a language we're still learning to read. Why we keep looking. So why do we keep doing it? Diving into cold, murky water, chasing ghost cities we'll never rebuild? Maybe because it reminds us how small we are, and how connected. Every lost empire was once convinced it would last forever. Every flood thought it was the last one, and yet here we are, still telling their stories, still building our own coastlines a little too close to the edge. We don't really learn, but we do remember, and that's enough. Hey again, we've been deep underwater for a while now, drifting through drowned streets, half-buried temples, and enough saltwater symbolism to fill a medieval sermon. So let's end tonight not at the bottom of the ocean, but right where the waves meet the land. Because that's the real story here, our endless, slightly self-destructive romance with the coast. Humans keep building at the water's edge. We always have. Even when the tide knocks the house down, we rebuild it, repaint it, and act surprised the next time it happens. It's a pattern as old as civilization, and as predictable as high tide. The allure of the shore. There's something magnetic about coastlines. The sound of waves, the flat horizon, the sense that you're standing on the edge of everything. Early humans must have felt it too. Maybe that's why so many of our earliest settlements are right on ancient shorelines. Rivers, deltas, and coasts gave us food, trade routes, and a view of approaching enemies. They also gave us floods, hurricanes, and the occasional complete geological betrayal. But in our defense, living next to the sea just feels right. It's dramatic. You can watch storms roll in like a live painting, and if you're royalty, you can put a palace right where everyone will see it, before it inevitably erodes into the surf. It's like we're hardwired for both beauty and bad decisions. The flood cycle of civilization history, when you zoom out, is basically a highlight reel of coastal optimism followed by regret. Mesopotamia. Let's build between two massive rivers. What could go wrong? Egypt. This flood thing's fine. Totally predictable. Venice. Who needs land when you can have soggy glamour? The Netherlands. We will simply tell the ocean to behave. Spoiler. It never listens. Every empire thinks it's smarter than water. Every empire eventually finds out it's not. But that cycle, rise, flood, rebuild, has kept our species busy for about 10,000 years now. And honestly, it's kind of impressive how bad we are at learning lessons. Venice. The city that refuses to leave. Let's talk about Venice. The floating city that's been slowly trying not to drown for the past. 600 years or so, built in a lagoon on top of wooden piles. Venice was basically a medieval engineering miracle. A city balanced between land and sea. And for a while it worked. Then the sea level kept rising. By the modern era, Venice had become the poster child for beautiful decay. Floods became part of the daily schedule. Piazza San Marco turned into a temporary swimming pool every winter, and yet, no one left. Venetians adapted, raised walkways, waterproof doors, and eventually the Mose Project. A massive flood barrier system that might buy them a few more decades. It's a losing battle, but an elegant one. If most cities die quietly, Venice insists on drowning in style. Jakarta, the modern Atlantis in progress across the world, Jakarta, Indonesia, is facing the same fate, but with less romance and more concrete. It's one of the fastest sinking cities on Earth. Groundwater extraction. Poor drainage and rising seas have caused parts of it to sink by up to 25 centimeters a year. That's a lot. Enough that the government finally announced they're building a whole new capital, on a different island entirely. But here's the strange part. Even as parts of Jakarta literally disappear underwater, people still move there. The city keeps growing, because that's what humans do. We cling to the edge, even as it slips away beneath us. There's a sort of cosmic stubbornness to it, like watching someone insist their favorite chair is fine while it's on fire. New Orleans. Dancing on the Delta. Then there's New Orleans, a city that has turned living below sea level into an art form. Built in a swamp, surrounded by levees, New Orleans has always been one bad storm away from tragedy. Hurricane Katrina proved that in 2005. The flooding wasn't just a natural disaster, it was a historical echo. Centuries of engineering, politics, and neglect all collapsing under pressure. Literally. But the city came back, because of course it did. Music, food, festivals, everything that makes it alive refused to sink. New Orleans might be one of the few cities that understands the sea as both enemy and muse. It dances to it, even when the floor's wet. The Netherlands. The people who told the ocean. No. If anyone has truly made peace with living below the tide, it's the Dutch. Nearly a third of the Netherlands is below sea level, meaning the entire country exists because of human defiance. For centuries, they've been building dikes, levees, and pumps, turning the ocean's old real estate into farmland and cities. They even have a national policy called Room for the River, because after a few centuries of near drownings, they realized maybe fighting water isn't always the best idea. Now instead of blocking floods, they sometimes invite them, creating floodplains and reservoirs that absorb excess water. It's less battle and more negotiation. Still, you get the sense that one day, the North Sea might remember the arrangement and send an invoice. Why the tide always wins. Here's the truth. Though, every wall, every barrier, every clever plan, they all buy time, But never victory. The ocean doesn't rush. It doesn't fight. It just waits. And that patience is unbeatable. Geologists estimate that, in the last 100 years, global sea level has risen about 20 centimeters. By 2100, it could rise another meter, enough to displace hundreds of millions of people. It won't happen all at once. It'll be gradual, like a slow exhale. Cities won't sink overnight. They'll just soften around the edges. And maybe one day, 1,000 years from now, someone will dive where Manhattan used to be and find the faint outline of a subway tunnel, half filled with coral. It's hard to say whether that thought is terrifying or strangely peaceful. Maybe both. The archaeology of us, you know what's fascinating? We're already leaving behind the archaeology of the future. Plastic layers and sediment, metal skyscrapers destined to rust into reefs, satellites that'll one day fall into the sea. Future historians, assuming we don't accidentally delete ourselves, will look back and say, ah yes, the Anthropocene, the age when humans built glass towers at sea level and acted surprised when water behaved like water. They'll find our lost cities too, not mythic marble capitals, but shopping malls, metro stations, and the occasional luxury condo. Not exactly poetic, but still history, and maybe that's fitting. We began by worshipping the sea. We'll end by being part of it. The ocean's memory is long. If there's one thing this whole story has shown, it's that the ocean forgets nothing. Every empire, every kingdom, every pier and port, all still there, layered like the pages of a very damp book. You can still trace Roman harbors under the Mediterranean, medieval docks under London, even prehistoric forests under the North Sea. They're all part of the same slow-motion story, and one the Earth's been writing since before we learned to spell. Maybe that's why listening to waves feels timeless. It's not just noise, it's memory. A rolling whisper that says, I was here before you, and I'll be here after. Why we keep building anyway? So if the tide always wins, why do we keep building by the sea? Because the alternative, staying inland, avoiding risk, never seeing the horizon, feels less like safety and more like exile. The coast is where trade happens, where cultures mix, where life feels open-ended. It's where we first realized the world was bigger than our valley. And maybe that's worth the risk. Maybe it's part of what makes us human. This blend of wonder and denial. We know the water will rise. We build anyway. We live anyway. We love anyway. And then we tell stories about the ones who came before us. The drowned, the forgotten, the beautiful ruins. Because someone has to remember. And if the ocean's keeping half the archive, we might as well keep the other half. The last light beneath the waves. If you could dive down to one of those lost cities right now, Heracleion, Pavlopetri, Port Royal, you'd notice something strange. The ruins aren't dead. They're alive with coral, fish, seaweed, tiny new worlds growing over the old ones. Life doesn't stop at the floodline. It just changes form. Maybe that's the quiet comfort buried in all of this. Nothing truly vanishes. It just shifts from one rhythm to another. The cities we lose become reefs. The stories we tell become myths. And someday, someone else, human or otherwise, will drift past our remains and feel the same quiet awe. The closing tide. So, that's where we'll end tonight. A little wiser, a little smaller, maybe a little sleepy. From the first villages on ancient shores to the skyscrapers of today, humanity's story is a long conversation with the sea. Sometimes we whisper, sometimes we shout, sometimes we just listen, and the ocean, patient as ever, hums back the same lullaby. You build, I rise, we dance. Soft closing tone. Thanks for staying with me tonight. If you're still awake, you deserve a medal. If you're not, that's fine too. The waves will finish the story for you. Good night, traveler. May your dreams stay above water, at least for now.